If you enjoy unusual stories, you've come to the right place.
What is the most creepiest thing you saw, even though you're very skeptical about paranormal? The boy I was babysitting one night came running out of his room crying, saying something was walking by his window. Now I get a lot of creepy stories and things from the kids I babysit. They have crazy imagination, so I go check, not really thinking anything. Something runs by the window as I'm checking it out, a distinctly humanoid figure. At this point, I needed a diaper as much as the little boy I was babysitting, so I text the guardians asking about it. And no, this is the response I get. "Oh my God, you saw it too." "Yeah," I cried, "called the cops too. They came by and said they didn't see anything around." The thing is, the guardians had called the cops several times before too for the same reason. One of the freakiest times I've ever babysat. There's a section of the factory I work in that's from the 1950s and is said to be haunted. Well, I was on the third floor one night. Shift is 11:00 p.m. to 7:00 a.m. when I saw someone lean out of one of the aceways along the side of the main walkway, notice me, and lean back in almost as if they were just checking to see who was there. Thinking it was my manager, I called out to him and walked over, but nobody was there. Being that this section of factory is 70-ish years old, the floors are all wooden and incredibly loud. There's no possible way someone could move around up there without making footsteps or creaks. I heard nothing, saw nothing else, and nobody else was on that floor. So what did you do? Like, how do you respond to that? I went looking for a way to explain it. Maybe it was cellophane wrap around a skid or a sheet of cardboard that caught a draft. That's what I thought anyway. But after 6 to 12 minutes of trying to find an explanation, I found nothing and had to get back to work downstairs. My uncle has a story of him and his siblings sharing the same experience while in 3 separate rooms. My uncle and I were driving in the town he went to school in. We drove past a house and I remarked how bad it looked. He replied, "It is worse inside. That place is haunted." I had never heard my uncle talk of anything paranormal, and I haven't since. The story goes that the 3 of them rented out some sketchy house while going to school. Apparently strange things would happen that made them feel uncomfortable, but never anything crazy. They would all notice. On a few occasions, they would wake up in the night with the blankets off and at the foot of the bed. Nothing strange. People kick off blankets when they get too hot all the time. One night, my uncle recounts that he had a dream he was falling and needed to grab onto something to save himself. He suddenly realized that he wasn't dreaming and he was being pulled by his ankles out of his bed. He grabbed the rails of the headboard and after a few horrifying moments he gets the strength to scream. At the same time he hears screams from his siblings' rooms. Just as soon as it started, the feeling ended and he ran to check on them. They all had the same feeling of being pulled out of their bed. Needless to say, they moved out and didn't look back. My older brother, I think in his mid to late 30s at the time, was screwing around with an Ouija board. My family has a history of screwing around with them and weird happenings, so I've never touched them. I'm a massive skeptic to everything. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe my brother was full of, feel free to say I'm making this up because it is very far-fetched. My brother might have been on drugs, doubtful, or maybe got some bad pot, but he wouldn't lie to me about this. So yeah, story goes, I guess, that he was playing Ouija with his friends, and the board had spelled out some words that implied the entity on the Ouija board was a person trapped in hell and that it needed their help getting out. It spelled out a first and last name and that this person needed to be stopped. Stop John Doe or find him or something. After they wrapped up their messing with the board, my brother made a note of what the person said in the name and stored it. As I said, our family has had weird coincidences around the board and have learned to write that down. Fast forward 2 or 3 days later and I get a phone call from my older brother and he's freaking out. He opened with something along the lines of, "I swear I'm not making this up. I know you're the only one in the family who won't think I'm nuts or that I'm lying when I tell you this." Then went on to tell me the aforementioned story. Apparently, he was reading the newspaper a few days after messing with the board and there was a small article about a car accident with a family and a drunk driver. Everyone in the incident died. Family, a couple kids, husband and wife, and the drunk driver. The drunk driver's name, which as he said damn near made him spit out his coffee, was the name from the Ouija board that he wrote down. Edit, my family writes this stuff down cause my dad had a similar experience where when he was a teenager, he asked it if he would ever get married and it told him HG. Then asked how many kids he'd have and it said RMTA. My dad wrote down the questions and answers, kept the note in a keepsake box because there was a bunch of other questions. He actually got real quantifiable answers for it and he wanted to see if they came true. None of them did, but he said a chill ran down his spine when he got to the questions about his getting married and having kids. HG is the initials of my mum and RMTA is the first names of his 4 kids in order of which they were born. I still think it's just odd coincidence given it's just 6 different letters that could be associated with any number of things relating to family life. I don't know. I take all of this with a huge grain of salt. This happened back when we were like in 3rd grade. It was around 6:30 p.m. right when the sun was almost set. My cousins swore that one of my grandfather's friends was in their backyard knocking on the window in their room and trying to talk to them. Although not entirely strange for him to be back there, he regularly helped my grandfather with his garden. At this point, he had been reported missing and nobody even knew where he was. It was only later that we learned he was already dead sometime that morning. He had been stabbed several times and his body found in a dumpster nearby. I don't know who my cousin saw that night. Something like that happened to my family. It's like the dead come to see whoever they want before they leave to the afterlife. My uncle died and my other uncle D, his brother, was packing his things ready to go to the funeral. His son, my cousin, asked him who that man was in that red coat in his room. Of course, my uncle D was confused. My cousin didn't really know Unclen that well. When they went to the funeral, you know what color my dead Uncle Ann was wearing in his casket. Reed had a room in our inn where a murder occurred. Got multiple complaints that the sheets have blood stains and the lights won't turn on from different guests every couple weeks. Whenever we checked the room, no issues. One time after moving, the guests got a noise complaint that there was screaming coming from the room. Checked the room empty. Listened to the neighbors' rooms and didn't note any noise either. We had never publicly released that the murder occurred in that room and nobody but staff knew. I'm skeptical but creeped me out. This one chills me. My aunt and uncle run a guest house. When they bought it, my dad asked if anything bad has happened in the rooms and the old owner said just one. That one guy came and stayed in room 9, then went in the night and committed in the woods adjacent to us. Room 9 is a fine room. Actually my favorite of them all for the sunlight it gets in the general vibe. But room 14 is completely haunted in my opinion. I worked there for a while cleaning rooms and helping out while they got to grips with the business. And I would be feeling completely fine up until hitting room 14. About 5 minutes into cleaning it, I would need to step outside and get some fresh air because I felt like I needed to throw up. This happened every time I needed to go in there. About 6 months later, it got an infestation of maggots. They were everywhere. My mum went in every hour to remove them to try and find where they were coming from. And ultimately, it seemed like they were dropping down from the bathroom ceiling. So he went into the roof expecting to find a dead possum or rat, but there was nothing, not even a single maggot. Stopped after 3 days, but it continues to have seemingly insignificant issues that guests mention, like the bathroom door moving when no one's been near it, which they assume is a breeze, or the walls making noises that they say sound like a rat or something scratching around. But all the rooms are connected in a line, so if there was a rat, it would be heard in other rooms too. It's just an inexplicably creepy room, and we have no idea why, and we can't do anything about it. I worked in the dementia ward at a care home facility. I was 3:00 to 11:30 p.m. and from 10:00 to 11:30 p.m. I would be the only employee in the unit. All of our residents were in their rooms either sleeping or watching TV around 10:00 p.m. Our unit was an L shape with a living room D room in the bend of the L anyways. One night around 10:15, I was just walking from one end of the unit to the other. We had quite a few empty rooms at the time, and we always kept their doors closed but not locked. I walked past some empty rooms, turned around at the end of the unit, and as I passed back past the empty rooms, one of the doors was wide open. I turned on the lights and looked through the entire room. They weren't very big, but there was nothing to find. There was no way any of my residents could have gotten up and opened a door and gotten back to bed without my noticing. I shut the door and checked that it was truly firmly closed. I sat in the living room area the rest of the shift just staring down the hallway terrified. Of course, I had been warned that weird things happen in care homes because there's bound to be lots of death. But I never talked to anyone who had a negative experience. They said it was more things that felt like a resident who passed getting confused and going back to their old room or favorite areas. I worked in a memory care unit, and one night this man spent most of the evening talking to his wife Jim. She had been dead for years. This kind of thing wasn't that unusual though. His mind wasn't sound and we figured it was just his memories and comforting for him to talk to her. But then later that night, another resident turned on her call light, asked us to make the woman in his room leave so she could sleep. We didn't see anything and asked her who it was. She looked over at the empty corner and said, "What's your name?" Then a second later, she said, "Her name is Jim." Well, that's terrifying. One time I was putting one of our residents to bed. He was New York Italian accent and everything. And the other staff had told me they thought he was in the mob, but no one had been able to confirm it because he didn't have much family. Anyways, as I'm putting him to bed, he's talking to me and suddenly stops and goes, "I can't remember where we put the body. Do you remember?" And I was just like, "Don't worry, we'll figure it out tomorrow." Not really that creepy, but made me wonder if I was putting slippers on a murderer. Was working as an EMT in a rural small town for a few years. Was up late after a run finishing my report when I started hearing someone come down some wooden stairs in the bay about 40 FT from me. The stairs go up to a training room and it's just me and my partner there. I go look, nothing there. I go sit back down and try to finish the report. Sound gets loud and fast down the stairs. So I just get up and start walking out when the plug-in for the ambulance just shoots out and crashes against the wall. Decided to finish my reports in the bunk rooms. One night I was driving the car with my friend in the passenger seat. We were taking back roads just listening to music. There was nobody else around and the stretch we were in was without street lights. Out of nowhere, 2 blaring lights shined in the rear view mirror. I swear I looked at the mirror and saw a car right behind me. Since nobody had been around just seconds ago, I assumed the car must be driving pretty fast, so I floored it. I braced myself for impact. A second later, when nothing happened, I looked back at the rear view mirror. There was nothing but the faint red from my own tail lights. I slowed and told my friend what I just saw. She admitted she did not see any such lights. She did, however, get a creepy feeling and shiver just moments before I saw it. The cherry on top. The road we were on is one that my driver's ed instructor had me drive on 14 long years ago. On that same stretch of road, he was telling me a story about some teen who was driving recklessly and drunk on that street. He went on describing the kid and how he went driving along with his buddies up until we came to a slight curve, and he pointed to a memorial cross on the side of the road, and that's where he crashed. My skeptical brain wants to chalk these headlights up to a hallucination, but I've never had a visual hallucination before. It's been years since this event occurred, and this most plausible explanation still doesn't make sense. The one and only time in my 30 years that I've ever had a hallucination just happened to be when my friend got the shudders as we were driving down the same road. I mean, I think that's still more likely than ghosts, but this was the one thing I've experienced that I really can't figure out. I went to my grandma's place when I was 40. Now this in Nepal, in a village in the hills where I have to trek literally 40 minutes to reach, and I'm a fat kid. No electricity, totally different from rest of the world. So I was with my uncle and some little girl from the village. We were going from one village to another. The path is literally a small portion of hill chopped off so narrow that only one person can go at a time. So we were walking in line. My uncle is in front telling me about the village and stuff. Me second and the girl behind me. On one side is the hill and other the slope of the hill. So we come across a tree with a green triangle and some strange markings. My uncle tells me that this is where our ancestors sat in prayer for a long time so that no one would fall off the hill and die. I'm mocking him inside, but respectfully listening. A small portion of the road is broken and leaves were collected in the ditch. My uncle skips over the leaves and tells me jump over the leaves, otherwise you will slip. I jump over the leaves, pass on the same instructions to the girl. Now what I forgot was that the girl doesn't understand a word we are speaking, as she hails from the village where the language is entirely different. She steps on the leaves, falls down the hill, and I'm frozen and my heart is pounding. The girl is falling downhill. She hits a tree. She grabs some small plants. She was very light and literally climbs uphill rock climbing style, catching small plants slowly. She fell almost a 180 ft downhill. She easily climbs up. My uncle is smiling at me and says, "I told you our ancestors prayed here." That experience was so surreal. Who was the girl? She was from our village and we were attending a function in the other village. My uncle did know the language, but he was speaking to me in the Hindi language. The girl had never left the village. She only knew the language spoken in the village, Pahadi, and the villages in our hills are like African tribes, not that big, only 6 to 7 families. So everyone knew everyone. I was about 11 years old when me and my friend went to say hello to his mum, who was working as a barmaid in one of the local taverns. The tavern was built in 1530, so it has a good amount of history. After saying hello to his mum, we went to leave and noticed the cellar door was open. Being curious 11-year-olds and out of earshot of any adults, we decided to sneak down and have a cheeky look around. When we got down there, it was kind of how you would expect, just loads of barrels of booze and storage for other bits and pieces. But suddenly we hear this, "Excuse me," from behind us. We spin around and there is a lady in the cellar. She says to us, "You shouldn't be down here and we should go back upstairs quickly." We do as we're told, and as we're exiting the cellar, we're caught red-handed by the landlord of the tavern, who asks us what we were doing in the cellar. We explain we just wanted to see what was down there, but the lady told us to go back upstairs. He looked a little confused by this and asked, "What lady?" before venturing down into the cellar himself. A few minutes passed, and when he came back, he told us there was nobody down there and to stop messing around, at which point we left the building to go and do other things. The thing I remember is the lady was dressed in an old-timey maid's outfit that you would see in a British Victorian period drama. I also remember she didn't feel threatening or scary, but rather kind and gentle. I messaged my friend about this a few weeks ago, 24 years later, and he remembered it clearly. I have heard several people talk about a maid or servant who was pushed down or fell down the cellar stairs and broke her neck. So in conclusion, it was either the ghost of a Victorian servant or the landlord was doing kinky stuff with someone in the cellar, and we arrived at an inconvenient time. Going to visit grandfather's grave when I was in my early 20s. My grandfather was buried in a really old churchyard where the oldest graves were in the center, like before Civil War times. It was really in the boonies, so it's like middle of nowhere with old church-type churchyard. Anyway, you have to walk the churchyard, and my grandfather is buried way in the back. So I hike up and say a few things and enjoy the quiet for a while, then start back down and detour a bit to look at some of the old gravestones. There is this one particular huge gravestone in the exact center, just massive compared to the others, which looks like a giant cut of rock was stood on end, and the marking were simply chiseled in. It also is the only grave marking with an old iron fence around the plot, so it is really overgrown in comparison to the well-maintained plots. So I amble over and look at this and try to read it, but the grass is really blocking the dates, so I lean over the fence to brush aside and look for details. And just as I read 1785, something well rattles right next to my ear. Immediately I think rattlesnake and jerk up. and as I do, something pushed me back hard. I actually skidded back about 3 ft and landed on my butt. I kind of freak a bit, looking around and trying to figure out what the hell happened. I looked down at the base of the grave trying to see if I saw a snake or something and then blinked because something was wrong. I couldn't figure it out at once, then sort of shuddered and then really looked, and there was something causing the air to blur in front of me when I looked at the grave, but it edges so everything was clear around it. I suddenly broke out in a cold sweat and butt scooted back so fast I hit my tailbone on a gravestone. I jumped up and half ran down the hill to the bridge to the courtyard and stopped right when I got to it to calm a bit. And then I turned around and looked up and I saw the air blur moving down the hill between the goddamn stones toward me, and it was vaguely human-shaped. I could literally see the movement as details went blurry and refocused as it moved. It wasn't fast, but it was coming. That did it. I tore ass across the bridge, jumped in my car, and burned rubber out of the lot. It's been nearly 18 some years since that time, and even typing this has got me jittery. Just thinking about seeing the world blurred without any reason to it, and it's moving toward you. Christ, roommate lost her cat. There's an old empty house next to where we live, also owned by our landlord, and we were allowed to use the space for parties, etc., so we were very familiar with the house and all of its rooms. It's about 2:00 a.m. and she's freaking out about the cat, so I proposed to help. We thought perhaps the cat might be in the house, so we go in there with a flashlight. My friend tells me she thought she heard me coming from the house earlier, so we keep looking. We get to the hallway and there's a ladder in the middle of the hallway leading up to an attic. Door of the attic was a hole in the ceiling of the hallway. Now, I had been on a crusade in this house many times and saw all of the rooms, but I had never seen an attic, so this was really weird. Now listen, normally I'm intrigued by these things and I'd be like, oh, an attic, let's go up there, adventure, but no. My stomach turned. Never ever had this ladder been down. Nobody knew there was an attic there, and we know it weren't squatters since the house was in the backyard of the place we lived. I had a very, very bad feeling because the ladder looked so inviting, almost too inviting. I told my friend that her cat probably wasn't up there and that we should go. We walked back and she tells me, I really thought I heard meowing up there before, but we both chickened and just went back. Walk out of the door back to our place and guess who's sitting at the front door? Her cat. Ever since, weird things are happening to me, mostly at the courtyard that is attached to the garden of the house. At first I thought I saw a black figure walking by one day but brushed it off. A few days later I was walking on the courtyard and all of a sudden I hear someone breathing in my neck. Thought it was one of my roommates trying to scare me, but nobody was there. I'm normally not into paranormal stuff and I always felt super safe there, but weird things keep happening. I also had bad cases of sleep paralysis after that incident. I don't know, there's a constant weird vibe now. Call the police and report seeing something in the building and note the attic stairs were down. It doesn't take much for a person to make cat meow. Well, the problem is that I didn't see someone in the building. I saw something in the courtyard. It's an open space and I saw this black shadowish figure moving fast just for like 2 seconds. That's why I brushed it off. But there's no trees there that can create shadows. It's literally empty. The chance that there's an actual person in there is almost zero. Since the house in a sort of backyard, it's impossible to reach from the outside and I live in a quite remote area. I also just realized the people who rented the house before it was empty were very weird and they all of a sudden moved to a country far away. They had about 5 cats but took all of them with them, and it has been a long time since they are gone. Did you ask your landlord about the ladder? No, I rarely see him. The ladder was attached to the door of the portal to the attic, so it's not like it's a random ladder. However, nobody knew of the attic, nor did anyone ever roll down the ladder. I don't believe in ghosts and paranormal stuff, but I'm absolutely sure I lived in a house that was haunted. I know that doesn't make sense. I lived there with my mom and stepdad in my late teens. We all thought we were going crazy until we talked about it one day and realized we were all having weird experiences. Just a few things that happened there I really can't explain. I once woke up with a very distinct handprint on my stomach, like someone had been pressing their hand into my skin and left a red mark. It was child-sized, way too small to be my own. I got into the shower once and when I got out, the candle in the bathroom was lit. I am 100% sure it was not lit when I got into the shower and I was the only one home at the time. A couple days after we moved in, was standing with my back to a wall talking to my mom. I felt a hand on my back shove me hard enough that I lost my balance and stumbled forward. I spun around, but obviously nobody was there. Just me and my mom, who I had been facing at the time. Other things could just be chalked up to the house being creepy. I'd always sprint up the stairs 2 at a time because if I went slowly, I'd get this horrible feeling about halfway up. It's hard to describe. It felt like there was someone looming over my shoulder right behind me and like that presence meant me harm. It was terrifying and I've never experienced anything like it before or since. My eyes would well up with tears and I'd be completely paralyzed with fear. I later found out my stepdad had been experiencing the exact same thing in that same spot on the stairs. There was also a loft area which was theoretically where we watched TV, but the feeling in that room was unbearable and we rarely used it. My mom experienced sleep paralysis while we lived there, but never before or since. She'd have this dream that she was awake and a figure was standing above her, holding her down with their hand on her chest so she couldn't move. It stopped when we left that house. She was also constantly losing things, and they'd turn up in places that made no sense. Weird drafts. Once I was sitting on the couch and there was a cool draft blowing on my arm coming from the aforementioned creepy stairs. After a few minutes, feeling like a total crazy person, I loudly said, "Stop doing that," and the draft stopped instantly. I feel like there's got to be an explanation for it all, but I don't have it. My grandparents built the house in the 70s when my mum was around 11 years old, and we moved in after my grandfather died and my grandma was moved to a care home. My mum says the house was always creepy, but I never got a chance to ask my grandparents about it.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to see more stories.